Welcome to Unlock Financial Independence, the #1 financial independence podcast for physical therapists. I am your host, Matt McClanahan. Welcome back, my financially savvy physios. I am your host, Matt McClanahan, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Unlock FI, where I help physical therapists just like you unlock your path to financial freedom while working as PTs. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you find the show valuable, love it if you subscribed and left me a review on Apple Podcasts or subscribed on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up, whatever you want to do there. And for the new and old listeners alike, go ahead and subscribe to the once per month newsletter, which will be linked in the show notes for monthly tips on things like travel hacking, state of student loans, listener wins, and more. On today's show, we're talking about getting free money, aka getting what you're owed, aka getting your employer match with your retirement accounts. So if you don't have a retirement account at your work, maybe disregard this. But if you work for an employer, most employers, especially as the company goes from being more of a small business, or if they're newer, but they usually start to add on these retirement plans. So what is an employer match? So for those of you who don't know, if you contribute to a 401k, a 403b, a 457b, or in my case of my last employer, a simple IRA plan, your employer may match your contributions to these plans up to a certain amount. How much money can you contribute, though? So for 2024, those numbers are going up, which is great. So for a 401k, a 403b, and a 457b, they're all going up by $500 to a total of $23,000 that you can contribute personally to that account in a year. Simple IRAs are also going up by $500 to a total of $16,000. So I don't want to dive into what the different plans are, why one employer might have a 401k versus a 403b. But if you have an HR department, check with them about what your contributions are or what type of plan that you have. If you're not contributing at all, I hope I convince you to go and talk to your employer about starting to contribute, at least until you can get your match. So let's dive into it. There are different ways that an employer can match what you're putting into your account. So there's some ways that they can do it called partial matching. And then there's also full matching. So partial matching can be a little bit more complex, in my opinion, but here is an example from a travel company that I am looking to work with. This is exactly verbatim what their 401k or whatever they have, what their match is, the description is. Match dollar for dollar up to the first 3%. And then 50 cents on the dollar on the next 2%, i.e., if you contribute 5%, they will match 4%. I know that's a lot of numbers, and I think that's the reason I don't like partial, because it kind of gets real fancy. It's like, we'll do this up to this, but then only this amount after this amount. It just gets confusing. So let's give a concrete example to help solidify that. Say you make $80,000 per year. If you put in 3%, they will too. So that comes out to $2,400 that you put in, and they will match it at $2,400 for a total of $4,800 put in. Then if you continue to put money in up to 5%, they will only match 50% of that. So if you put in another 2%, that is $1,600. They would only contribute 50% of that, or $800, right? This would bring your total contribution amount to $4,000 and theirs to $3,200 for a total of $7,200 saved in a year, tax-free, and that is you getting the full match. So anything you contribute after that does not get matched by that employer at all. So in this particular scenario, the most amount that you can contribute to retirement with a match is $7,200. Of course, In this scenario, you only contributed $4,000 of your own money. But if it's a 401k, as I mentioned earlier, you can contribute up to $23,000 to that account, right? So you've only put in 4,000 of 23,000. You still could do 19,000 more dollars if you want. Of course, it's not getting matched, but that's not what this podcast is about. It's getting your match, right? So that's partial matching. What's full matching? So it is simpler to understand, in my opinion. It basically is we will match 3% of your contribution, right? So if you only put in 1%, they'll put in 1%. But you won't do that after listening to this podcast, right? I hope you don't, because that is leaving free money on the table. So let's go over the same scenario as before. You make 80,000. If you put in 3%, they put in 3%. You're both contributing $2,400 for a total of $4,800. But something to note, your employer contribution does not count towards your total cap that I mentioned before, right? The 23,000. So there's a cap amount that they can contribute, but honestly, it's not worth diving into. For this podcast, you can look into what the total cap contribution amount is by your employer if you'd like to, but I doubt any PT company will ever put close to that in. So something to note. Let me know if you have an employer that does. I would be super interested to hear about that. All right, so that's partial matching and full matching. What is vesting? Well, this is when a company decides how long you need to work for them before their contributions to your retirement is actually yours. Okay, so let's say that one more time. Vesting basically says their company is going to give you money, but you got to be with us for a certain amount of time. So let's give an example. If a company has a 5-year vesting schedule and they match up to 3%, that means that you can contribute 3% and they will contribute 3%, but you don't actually keep their matched money until you've been with them for 5 years. So there are other vesting schedules where if you leave after 2 years, maybe you only keep like 50% of what they matched, but after 4 years, you'd keep 100%. So all vesting really means is that there's a asterisk next to the money they're giving you. You either have to work for them for a certain amount of time, and then you get it all 100%, or slowly after say 1 or 2 years, you can keep 25% after 2 to 4, right? Whatever the number is, it's basically saying there's a caveat to us putting money in your 401k. You got to work for us for a little bit of time. This is definitely something you should look for when you find a new job, or even look to see if your current employer has a vesting schedule, because you don't want to be surprised by that, right? You don't want to leave and think you have $10,000 and really only have $4,000, right? Because half of that or 3/4 of that is what they were putting in. Okay. So the last tip I have for you guys today on getting your retirement match: make sure your money that you're putting into these accounts is invested. If you missed podcast episode 6 on investing in index funds, go back and listen to that. But just remember that because your employer has matched your contribution does not mean that that money is automatically invested. You need to make sure you sign in to the financial institution that your employer is using, and making sure that the money that they've put in is actually being put into the stock market, because sometimes it just gets put into an account and then you have to decide where to invest it. If you never set that up, your money's not even being invested in the stock market. It's kind of just sitting like it's in your checking account at that point. What are we doing here, folks? Right? So then the question is which funds should you put your money into? And ultimately, that's your decision. But some things to think about are the lower the fees. So your account fees, transaction fees, etc., the better. This is why I personally like index funds. But go and check out episode 6 of the podcast to learn more. So I hope that you are convinced to look into your retirement accounts at your work. You're at least getting your match. It's the bare minimum that you should be doing. It is free money that you might be leaving on the table. look and see if you have a vesting schedule with your employer to determine if you're on the hook for any money. I wouldn't let that dictate whether you decide to stay somewhere or not. Just something that you should be aware of in your financial scenarios. That's all I have for you today, folks. Don't forget, subscribe to the monthly Financially Savvy Physio newsletter, where I'll send out those travel rewards hacks, financial information specific to PTs, and follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Unlock FI Rehab on all platforms. Until next time, folks, peace.